Good evening and welcome to another episode of Conversations. And I want to welcome our panel guest today as we're going to be speaking about something that's very important. And these voices, it needs to be heard. And many times it's something that seems to be the status quo. And there is an uprising in the churches with this again. There's an uprising in Nova Scotia and in Toronto, where we're seeing much more of domestic violence on the uprise. And so this evening, I'd like to thank Angel, Pastor Judith, and Sister Renee for joining us this evening to have a discussion about domestic violence, being survivors of that. And so please, we're going to have an opportunity for people to call in. We want to hear your voice because your voice, it does matter. And across the screen right now, you'll see the numbers coming through. We want to make sure that everyone's voice is being heard. And so let's move in and let's take the first question. How is everybody feeling first and foremost? How is everybody feeling this evening?
Good.
Good? Good? Awesome. And so when I choose you to answer your question, what I'm going to ask you to do is just briefly introduce yourself and then go ahead and answer that question. So as we go to, and I know I gave you guys the questions, but at times I don't go through it. I know Renee has been on this conversation platform with me before, and we had a great, awesome time. And I just go as the Spirit leads me. So we do have the questions. We're going to be asking those questions, but it doesn't have to go in that particular order that I had sent out to you all, okay? And then we'll have one final question that I didn't send out, but it's going to be a conversation piece for people to call in and to ask. So let's go right ahead. All right, here we go. So the first question that we will choose, okay. What does domestic abuse mean, and the bottom part of what are the warning signs? So I'm going to ask this to you to go first, Pastor.
Did you say me? Sorry, I didn't hear quite clearly.
Frozen.
Frozen.
So domestic violence. Yes, Pastor Judith Green. Yeah, correct.
Okay. So the question is, what is domestic violence? Domestic violence, it could mean physical violence, emotional, psychological, financial. It comes in various ways, and it disrupts, the home, the life, the women. Domestic violence it's very broad. It could include intimate partner violence. It includes, male and female violence. And we're dealing with violence. We're not necessarily dealing with abuse. So I'm going to assume that it's the physical. So it could take on physical as well as emotional as well.
Sorry about that, ladies. We are having some technical difficulties with Pastor T. And if I can ask you to elaborate, Pastor Kerr, a little bit more on what you talk about domestic. Your mic is off.
We're talking about domestic violence, and we're talking about what is domestic violence. I talk about physical violence. And that's the power and control. Historically, violence has been very much attributed to the domination and control of male over female, so to speak. And I'm talking in the Christian context of marriage. I should continue.
Let's put it over to Angel.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Angel Tika, and I live here in London, Ontario. And just to discuss the topic of domestic violence, I feel domestic violence is a very not talked about conversation that needs to be addressed. It's uh, it's one of those things that you find people in relationships. It can be with a husband or with a family. And in those situations, there's an imbalance of where the relationship should be, where someone feels more superior and wants to be something, and some of the stuff stems from cultural beliefs, some of it stems from just control issues, and also domestic violence also can show up just because some people have experienced it in the past. So it can be a generational thing. So domestic violence to me is when there is a little disorder in the home and the couple is not able to, especially if there's kids, they're not able to have a comfortable situation where the kids are comfortable living in the house, and they can either be abused financially, physically, emotionally, and the emotional part is never really addressed. There's also psychological traumas that go with it. So all these things are play a very big part in children and women's well-being. And me saying children and women doesn't necessarily mean that domestic violence only happens to the females. It also happens to males. So it's a very broad, very a very um, disturbing type of abuse that's affected a lot of people who sometimes go quiet, and some people want to talk about it but don't know where to go for help. So that's kind of where I'm with domestic violence, right?
Thank you so much. You made some really good points there. I'm going to put it over to Renee if you wanted to introduce yourself and then
Sure.
answer. Thank you so
Sure.
much.
Good night, everyone. My name is Renee. I am currently residing in Connecticut in the States. So for me, domestic violence is a very touchy subject, not because it happened to me. It happened, I get into that later, but the meaning of domestic violence. So it's an incident or a pattern. So when you
Mm.
see one becoming abusive, it could be verbal, physical, psychological, mental, emotionally abusive. It's
Mhm.
it's an incident or a pattern that you have to look for controlling or threatening behavior. They may
Mm.
also become violent, and they may become degrading to the person. But what a lot of people may get confused about when it comes to domestic violence, because whenever anyone speaks about domestic violence, they only think of domestic violence being against a partner. But domestic violence can also happen to someone from the family or a caregiver. So a lot of people may not know that your own caregiver can become domestically violent towards you. Um, it's something that is stigmatized, that it's only
Mm.
for women, but there are also men who are being abused in
Yes.
the home.
Yes.
Uh, Men may not speak up because they may feel ashamed, because they're
Yeah.
supposed to be the machismo partner. And if a woman is being abusive to them, whether it is physical, especially physical, they may tend to not say anything. On the other hand, a woman don't say anything, sometimes may not say anything because she's afraid. So you find that men don't say anything because of shame, and women may be ashamed, but she's also afraid. And that's just my perception. It's not something that's, but as I mentioned, it can be physical, it can be verbal, it can be psychological, and it also can be sexual.
Very, very
and
true. Very true.
and emotional. So I just want to put it out there that domestic violence is not just only physical.
You
So,
know, yeah.
no, go ahead.
Thank you so much for sharing.
You're welcome.
You know, it is so true. I myself is a survivor of domestic violence. In my marriages, I have gone through them all. Spiritual, where no one's going into church. If I'm not going to church, no one's going to church. So stopping me from getting my spiritual abuse. Gone through it financially, building up business, goes in, draws out the money, won't pay the mortgage, won't pay anything. That's controlling of the finances, where it's financial abuse. You can't do anything,
Yeah.
you can't do anything. Emotional abuse, which hits the mental, and they all hit the mental aspect of it. The physical violence as well. But you mentioned something that a lot of people don't realize, and it's the sexual abuse. There is
Yeah.
sexual abuse that ties into that. And, all of you guys are very, very right in the way that you described what it means to you, what that domestic violence means. And one thing I always like to say, I want to add a part to it too, is domestic violence means something that is happening domestically within the home. And so can children be part of this domestic violence?
Yes.
Absolutely. And we have to realize that that can happen inside the home, where a parent is the one that's doing it to the child, or the child is doing it to the parent. That is still domestic violence within the home. And so as we go through this evening, I want people to understand the full circle of what domestic violence is. And over the next couple of weeks, we'll be hitting different parts of what domestic violence is. And once again, I want to thank you guys so very much, as this is a very personal topic. And but as we heal, we need to speak about it more, because there's a lot of women that look like us, and as Sister Renee said, men as well, that are going through that, and their voices are not being heard, or they don't know what to say or what to do. So I want to thank you guys once again for taking the next hour and doing this journey with us. And so I'm going to turn to Angel, because I started out with you, Pastor Judith. So I'm going to turn to Angel now. I go around, and everybody gets a chance to be first for each segment. And so before I go into the next question, and this is going to be for each person, can you tell us a little bit about what happened with you? And we'll go to the second question for the night, so people can understand exactly where you're coming from and get a perspective of what you went through. So I'm going to give everybody about 2 to 5 minutes just to sum it up and talk about it briefly. And as we hit to number 2, go ahead, Stranger.
Okay, well, my experience of domestic violence came with a little bit of substance abuse in it as well. So I was in a relationship, married young. I got married, I think, when I was 22, and had my, well, 20, around 22 going on. And then had my child at 25, and the relationship was going great, but we had so many differences starting out. And culturally, I'm originally from Zimbabwe, and there is a hierarchy of things, the way things are done. The man is more dominant in a relationship, and 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 there's certain protocols that a woman is supposed to follow. Especially in my culture, they pay lobola, and then you're married, and to some extent, some people can feel like, okay, you are now owned by the family because you're married into this, and your responsibility is to have bear children and and be a wife. That means taking care of all the household chores and doing all that stuff. So we were young, and there was some things that didn't align with my upbringing, and as a result, there were so many conflicts in the relationship because I was more independent, and being raised by a single mom, independence comes with that. So now being told what to do and all this stuff, and being in a relationship which is with someone who is more domineering and wanting to be more, have more power and control, led to a lot of conflict, as I've mentioned already. And then that created an abusive partner. So in my relationship, it was also coupled with alcoholism on my partner's side. So my my our structure of how domestic violence looked was more like there was control of power, there was control of I pretty much, in an ideal world for my partner, I should stay home and take care of the kids and beg for everything else, which, as I said, as an independent woman raised to fend for yourself and do stuff, that was so misaligned with what I agreed to. So, due to the conflicts, we were always at loggerheads, and sometimes in the heat of the moment, it the abuse of power flares in front of the kids just to show that, okay, I'm in power, I'm in control, and then as a result there's arguing, there's yelling and all that stuff, and as a result that's not healthy for the kids on in a cognitive or emotional developmental side. That affects the kids because they have to witness all this stuff happening between the
Yeah.
people that they love dearly, who are supposed to be protecting and caring for them and showing them the way. So those are things that um, I saw in my relationship. There was fear, there was insecurity because you don't know how, after a bottle, how things are gonna flare up. You don't know how what tomorrow is gonna bring, because it's like with abuse as well, you'll see there's always tendencies to say there's conditions. You do this so that I can do this. You do this so that I can do that. So you never really know what tomorrow brings. If you're not doing this, then maybe tomorrow is not you won't be able to pay bills. Tomorrow maybe you're out, maybe out of the house.
That's
Maybe
it. That's
so
it.
you have all those insecurities, and you don't really know where your life is going, because am I getting a divorce tomorrow? Am I going to still be with my partner? So at the same time, I feel like I'm saying, coming from a background of a broken home, my situation was more of I wanted to keep my family unit together,
Right.
and also having a background where my mom was unfortunate to have lost all three of her husbands, leading to her having children. Her first husband, who was my dad, uh, died during the war, and then she got remarried, and then her next husband died, and I had a brother out of that, and then she got tried it again, and and then had another son. So all of us had different dads, not by choice, but due to my mom's being widowed 3 times.
Yes.
So for
Yeah.
my life, I kind of wanted a relationship, all my kids to be with the same.
Person.
Uh, so as a result, through all the things that were going on, you're trying to say, okay, this is a person I've chosen. I don't want to have multiple kids from different partners, so
Right.
I'm going to stay in it.
Yeah.
So that you try and fix things, you try and make sure that, okay, you know what, maybe I can enjoy this. Okay, maybe okay, let me let down my independence. Let me try and do this so that this works out. But then
Yeah.
in all this, what I did learn was someone who's abusive will always be abusive, whether you do succumb to the things that they say you do. Um, if it's in them, they're just
I'm
gonna
gonna
do.
I'm gonna hold on to that one because that's part of our next question. So hold on
Yeah.
to that thought, okay? Hold on to that thought. I'm gonna get Renee to answer that question, and the second question is how does it happen, and she answered that about
Mhm.
being a part of the environment of growing up, and not only that, but substance abuse, which is a big takes a big toll
Mm.
on these situations, because the individual that is the one that is causing the abuse is not able to think or act rationally, and
Yeah.
so therefore, because of the abuse, I too, my second husband had that, where he was addicted to crack cocaine and some other substance abuse, which I did not know of. But during the marriage, you get to realize your eyes get opened, and so you understand that there is something that is causing them to react in the way that they're reacting. And so I thank you once again, Angel, for sharing that. So Renee, if you can go ahead and tell us yours, and it tells us how this is happening, what happens. Go ahead.
So I was born into it.
Mm.
And I say born into it because, I've told my sister that I remember at 2 or maybe 3 seeing violence in the home. I've made a name up for my dad. I call him Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Mm.
My sister and I, we have different fathers. So she's my older sister. Well, my only sister. So my father have 4 boys, 1 girl. I'm the only girl. So my father was my idol, the love of my life, when I was growing up. However, that was the father when he's sober, because he's the sweetest person whenever he was sober. But whenever he got intoxicated, it
Mm.
was a different story. You couldn't speak to him, he wouldn't listen. However, when I've gotten so used to it as a kid that I know when my father is drunk. I know when he's drunk, there's going to be problem. So I would have to set up myself, because whenever he's about to hit my mother and he sees me, he will stop. No matter what it is, he will stop because I'm there. So I felt like I was the one thing that kept him from even going any further, even if he wants to hit her. But what I found out growing up, and because I was trying to analyze as to why he became that way. So I dug deeply and I realized that my father was also mentally, emotionally, and psychologically abused by his own mother.
Mm.
And that's because in Jamaica, the colorism was so bad. He's the darkest one. And he was the only boy. 3 sisters, he was the only boy. 4 boys, I'm the only girl. So my grandmother kind of treated him badly growing up, and he resented her. And I felt like he just resented other women going
Uh, uh,
forward.
see
And
that.
what got worse is that he resented light skinned women going forward. Like he didn't
Mm.
like anybody light skinned, because his sisters and his mother, he resented his mother. So I grew up seeing, until 15, I grew up seeing my father hitting my mother. Whenever he was drunk, I knew, I started to react fast. I would go to the bar to try to find him because I want to sober him up. So I felt like that was my
Mm.
responsibility, to sober him up. Whenever, but it's getting late in the morning, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, and I have school the following morning, I would have to, okay, he's not in the house. He's at the rum bar. So I would have to go and look for him, because I know how tumultuous that house was going to be when he comes in. So I have to be there, to say, Daddy, don't. But there are circumstances when he would come in, and there it was. I would, see him beat up. And my mother was about 5'2". My father was about
Mm.
6'1". He wasn't a skinny person, and he would hit her. And I often wondered why a man would do that to a woman, especially when she was the breadwinner of the house. So
Sometimes.
the unfortunate part, it was, you know, all through it, my mother I never seen her cried. I've
Wow.
never seen her shed a tear. Never. She fought back. She may not have, won, but she fought back. But I've never seen her shed a tear. And this was because of jealousy. This wasn't even about control, because he had no control. This woman was maintaining us, him, and her family members. So she was the breadwinner for everybody, us and her whole family member. So I felt like, as a man, you should have respect for her. But what I felt, you start to learn, you start to go to school, you start to understand, you grow up. This was all of his ego, about ego, resentment with his mother,
Mm.
and ego.
Ego. Yeah.
My mother became the beaten stick in the house for him. And I vowed to myself, I will never, forgive me, ladies and gentlemen, I would never let a man put his hand on me. I vowed that to myself. And, I wanted to have that conversation with my mother. However, she passed when I was 15, because, I often ask, like, why would you make a man put his hand on you like that? But I got the opportunity because my father now had Alzheimer's. And I had the opportunity to ask him why he did it, but his excuse was, you don't know what your mother did. I still don't know what my mother did for you to put your hands on her, because now he doesn't remember anything, but I wanted to know why you stayed with him. And, a lot of women may say, oh, well, I have kids. And I don't think it was love. I think she was trying to protect us. They were together when they were 17, and she was just trying to protect us. She didn't want to go, be with someone else. He was a great father to us when he's sober, and she knew that.
Yeah.
And me being his only girl, she didn't want to bring me around that type of environment where I would be molested by someone. She felt that my dad was taking such good care of us that it wouldn't make any sense. But I'm like, if you're the breadwinner of this house, there's no way a man should put his hands on you. And I felt like she knew her worth. But what I could tell you was that the last time he put his hands on her, she was taking a shower, and she called me, and he was there arguing about the same thing. He was drunk, and I knew what was going to happen. And she said, talk to your dad. But I remember seeing a pot of water boiling on the stove. I had no idea. And, he hit her, and she just walked over and took the water and threw it on him. And,
Hold that thought. I'm going to go. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm going to, because that's part of, I think, our fourth question. What can you do about it? What do people do about it? And it can cause more trauma. But I want you to hold that as I asked Angel to hold that. I'm going to go over to Pastor Judith to do the same thing, because it answers the second question is, how does this happen? And so when you can tell a bit about your story, it answers that question. How does it happen? Go ahead. You're on mute.
Sorry.
Oh, just before you go, because someone texted me about the number. I didn't want to interrupt, but I always do my commercial break. So this is our commercial break. Anyone that wants to call it in, please, you can do so now. 905-566-1826. And if you're calling in from out of country, out of state, Jamaica, other places. And thank you guys on the Facebook that's watching in. Hello. Have any questions, please go ahead and ask. And those on YouTube, welcome. And we thank you for watching. And if you want to call in on the WhatsApp, the telephone number there is 1-718-524-9501. Once again, you want to save it under conversations, because we want to hear from you again in the next 2 weeks when we have this. Save it under conversations. You're going to see an icon for sbrlivefm.com come up, and that is how you're going to connect with us. And then go over to your WhatsApp link and then call, and engineer is there waiting. So please, if you have a question, comment, you want to weigh in, please do so. We thank you and we welcome you, because all voices matter and we want to hear from you. Go ahead, Pastor. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Just want to say that domestic violence cut across all cultures and all socioeconomic groups. It does not discriminate. My experience with domestic violence, I was fairly young, and I was in a relationship with this man, and we had an argument. And before I knew it, I was punched in the face. And I remember, just crying and having to go to the hospital. And when I go there was a lot of shame and stigma associated to it. I was asked, was the police called? And of course, no, because of my background, right? Coming from Jamaica, being a Black woman calling the police on a Black man. I was afraid of the ramification. I was afraid of the outcome. and the consequences. So no, the police was not involved. While I was at the hospital, they spoke to me about, they give me information about domestic violence and so forth, and um, the police was not called for some reason. I know it's different today, that if you end up in the hospital with an injury, there will be an investigation, and it would be reported to the police. But at that time, it was not. The sad thing about my situation is that I could not actually go through some of the procedures that I needed to go through to, treat my injury, because they asked if I was pregnant. So this was how I found out actually that I was pregnant. It's because I went to the hospital because of a domestic abuse. And yeah, so it was very traumatic for me. I understand that, um, culture plays such a major role, and there is, in some culture, there's still the acceptance of violence, that violence against women and girls, or violence against women and children, are still very much so accepted. I i felt like when I went, like, I didn't have the knowledge really to deal with it as I should. And the resources were not there. The services were not easily given to me. So I find ignorance is another issue in dealing with domestic violence. Many people do not know of the services that is out there, and that we need to do more in order to deal with, the stigma, the lack of resources, um, for people, for women especially, that suffer in domestic violence. So this, my experience has taught me that, many women, number one, they will cover up. It's a kind of covering up. They will protect their partner, even though their partner has become, so to speak, their enemies in the home. They will still go to very far length to protect them. Um, for me, it was really a lack of self love, with a lack of self-love. When we don't love ourselves, we will allow others to abuse us. I lack self-esteem. I was at a place in my life where my self-esteem was very low. There's a sense of worthlessness, because after that initial abuse, and I found that I was pregnant, I had a son, and I went on to have two more children for my abuser. So I do understand that domestic violence is a cycle. And someone had mentioned that is generational, is transgenerational. It can be. Um, for me, I don't remember really watching my parents or my grandparents engage in any physical violence. But for me, I have suffered, physical, emotional, psychological, financial, sexual. I've experienced violence on these levels. So this is my story, and
I
my
think
message
Apostle
is,
Thomas got kicked off. I don't see her.
okay. My message is that, there is still so much work to be done in this area, that domestic violence is on the rise again. And of course, I have a concern for children, because domestic violence affect children. Even if children are not directly, have not directly experienced abuse, it affects them. It affects them, in their development, and it affects them as they grow older throughout their lifespan. So it is a concern, and it should be a concern to all of us, because it does affect, the society in which we live in.
You're so right in everything you've said, and I am glad you're here today to tell your story, and I'm happy that you're a survivor. And just listening to your story too, just the cycles in which abuse came, like as an immigrant, if we touch on just that part, as an immigrant coming to a new country,
Yes.
I've a lot of people actually um, suffer in jailhouses due to domestic violence because of just that fear of reporting to the police. Because like
Mhm.
it's the fear of what are people going to think about me, what are people going to say, and it's like, oh, maybe. And like you said, um, abusers are normally so capable to take away your strength. They've got a way of taking away your superpower of knowing who you are,
Yes.
what you want in life, and all that stuff. You just become, you just end up feeling so insecure. You end up feeling insufficient. You end up feeling so many things. Even if you were top of your class, even if you were
Mhm.
great sports.
Mhm.
You were the best at everything, but the minute you get into a relationship with an abuser, they just have a way of kind of bringing you to reducing you to a size, right? Like you say, and then like going back to the immigration part of it, it's
Mhm.
always about our community, right? And you build a society around you and people around you, and then it's what will they think of me if I report my partner and send him to jail? But these are things that are happening every day, and the fear of not knowing what other services are out there for women to be able to come out of this, and just the fear of what am I going to do? Because
Yeah.
sometimes in abusive situations, um, your partner or the abuser will not want you to advance beyond their abilities. Like they won't want you to go to university. They won't want
Mhm.
you to understand what's going out there. They don't want you to have financial literacy. They don't want you to understand the immigration. They handle all the paperwork. They handle all the finances. So you're in a space where you're like, okay, so what do I do now if
Right.
without him? You become a dependent, right?
Yeah.
And that's where I find a lot of women are, and it's men too, because if we take a look at it, there's a lot of abuse, not just to women. We find there's a lot of people who migrate and marry for papers, and they're
Mhm.
controlled in senses of
Yeah.
your paycheck is going in my account. If you don't do this, I'm going to report you to immigration, turn you back.
Right.
And we have a lot of men. In my experience, I have seen and heard multiple stories of people mostly coming from the islands. They come on the farmers program, and then they engage in different activities, and then eventually maybe they want to change to getting their paperwork and they marry for papers. But then it's like the abuse they face in those relationships where they feel I just have to work hard to get my things.
Mhm.
But in working hard, they end up securing a home, securing a car, securing everything for their family, only to be abused out of everything. And
Yes.
then they are left with the papers but have nothing to show for
Sure.
their hard work. So
If
abuse shows up in so many ways,
Yeah.
and um,
can I step in here for a second? We have someone on the line. I know Pastor T is not here. I
yeah,
think she wants to ask a question. So let me get her in here right now.
Sure.
And go right ahead, caller. Hello, hello. Are you there? Hello, caller. Are you there? I guess they hung up. Just to fill in for Pastor T, I know we are talking about abuse, the wrong total abuse actually. Abuse is abuse is abuse. It doesn't matter whether it's male or female or even children has gone through abuse as well. even though it is widely known around females.
Mm.
Right.
If there was something that you could have done to stop it, what would you do? Or what could you have done to stop it? And here's Pastor T.
So, you have women who have called the police. You have women who have been to the police station. You have women who have been to the courthouse. And though they have done the legal work to protect themselves, sometimes you find that they ended up being killed by the abuser. So, because I've never been abused, thank God, because I, watching my mother, I said, no, that's not going to happen to me. However, I feel it depends, and I could be wrong, it depends on the person in that situation, because one situation doesn't fit all, right? You may have kids and you may want to go to a shelter. Sometimes these abusers follow you around. They know where you work, they know where you're staying, and they follow you because they go into I'm gonna get her back spirit. So they're gonna get you back. You put them through this, you go and you report it. How dare you stay away from me? So they're gonna get you back. So I feel like in this situation, though the resources are there, it's gonna be up to that person who's being abused of what they should do, because I don't think it's a one size fit all. Am I wrong, ladies?
I believe what you're saying is right. I mean, the question is very it's a strong question, like what would you do to get out of it? I mean, there's no easy answer to that, honestly, because it's like there's a lot you can, right? But the biggest thing is for someone in an abusive situation is to understand their right to being their right to being. Like, I mean, they are an individual, they're important, they're strong, they need to understand. You've got to pick yourself up, and you've got to build yourself up to be able to move up, because like I said, in these type of relationships there's terrible ways of manipulation and emasculation and making people feel so small to a point where it seems like there is no way out, right? So in this case there's a power and control issue, there's some learned behavior from the other, substance abuse involved, there's a lot of things that you have to do, but the biggest thing I would say is take caution of what it is that you're going to do. You have to make a plan, right? The biggest thing is make a plan, have a safety. If you realize, find out, okay, this is my situation, I'm in an abusive relationship. You now have to actually have a list of things you should do. You have to have a list to say, in the event that um, I feel we have a crisis in the house, who do I call? Where is my safety? Where can I go? You have to also always have a bag prepared so that you're not starting to shuffle around and look. You have to have an emergency contact, you have to have your phone charger, everything in your bag so that you're ready to leave. I mean, if you're afraid to call the police, always have a friend who can pick you up right away. But like my friend has said, it's so hard because there's so much control over you that you could die. There's so much control over you leaving that you don't know what's safe and what's not. So there's a lot of fear around it too, because it's like I've seen so many situations where um a lot of this stuff doesn't end well. You can be successful in leaving, don't get me wrong. You could say, okay, leave, I will leave. You'll leave, but then you're going to have to get restraining orders because this person can come wherever you are. And at this point, they have no control over you. So some people say, it's either I have you or nothing at all. So they're easily quick to say, I can kill you and there's no repercussions if you, because they make you feel like without you, there's nothing else for them.
If I can
So
jump in just quickly before Pastor T takes over, as being abused or not being abused, as the sister says, I think a sister Renee said she wasn't in that situation. Can you recognize an abuser before you even get involved in the relationship, or
Yes.
because
I'm not
for some
joking.
reason
Yes.
I find that women go into a relationship, they know what the person is like, they've seen their behavior, yet they continue to proceed with the notion that I think I can change him.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, you can. And to answer your first question, I wanted to say, even though I said in every situation it's different, I think the first thing universally, everyone, no matter if you're a male or female, the first thing that everybody should do is to acknowledge that you're being abused. Because what happened is that some people it happened the first time and they're like, you know what, it's okay. However, they may start to blame themselves and say, you know what, maybe it's me, I'm the problem, then I need to change. So I think acknowledging that you're being abused is the first thing. Your second question, can you know? I can. Reason being because I've watched it and I said never, never, ever. I don't care if it's verbal, physical. And I'm very in tune to it because of growing up in it. And because I made that promise to myself. For an example, I was dating someone and he said something. He wasn't verbally abusive, but he was very, very extremely disrespectful. He called me the female dog, and I was like, no, you cannot speak back to me. Do not call me because you're being very disrespectful. So I was like, no, you're not going to talk to me like that, you know. And in my head, because he didn't know anything about my past, and I said, though my father treated my mother like that, I am not going to let any man speak to me that way. Nobody. And I didn't speak to him for a whole year. And, he kept on calling me. I wouldn't talk to him because I felt, if you talk to me like that one time, you're going to keep on talking to me like that. So it took him a year and he came to my house. He rang my bell and I wasn't even expecting him. And I ran to the door and I saw him. And his first words were, Renee, I'm so sorry for what I did. Even though this was a year ago, I feel like sometimes you can see it and sometimes you can't see it, but I always make sure that because I didn't want to end up like my mother. So maybe that's why I was so in tune with it. And I know she didn't force herself to be in it. I can't tell you why she stayed. I wish I knew, but I kind of understand. But yes, I can spot it. I can't speak for everyone, but I can spot it.
Pastor T, back to you.
Much. I appreciate you. Um, One thing I'd like to add is it all depends on how long you've dated the person.
Yes.
Because I got married when I was 19 after just dating my first husband right out of high school for maybe about 6, 7 months because I made a promise to my father and to my father above that I wouldn't have sex until I was married. And so when I met him and the body was doing all of it was doing, um, he asked me to marry him and I married him, did not know about all of these traits that he had. And so it all depends, and that's why it's very important to you to court the person, to get to know the person, not just them, but also their family. Because from then I realized it was a family trait because his father was an abuser as well. And so when you don't know that, you don't court it as enough, long enough, you don't know, and you just go with the flow. And I heard Angel had said something. I was able to leave. I was successful in leaving. But you see, a lot of times with the manipulation is, I did tell my mom, but he would take the phone and says, we're just joking around because he was very, very what's the word, manipulative or
Manipulative.
narcissistic, but he had a charm. He had a charm about
Mm.
him, right? And so he would laugh and charm his way around until she came the day his sister had called the police when I had to call out for someone. I didn't hang up the phone and she heard everything. And she was the one that had called the police that night. Or I wouldn't have been here because he took the knife to take the baby out of my stomach. And he says, death do us part. And so I wouldn't have been here if it wasn't for his own sister. But I was able to leave successfully. Never returned back to him, but went back into another abusive relationship. Again, right? I am my being brought up, I can look back at it because when you heal, you get the healing process. And you're going to church, and the pastor would say, because I opened it up to people, but they would go back into the scripture and say, there's nothing for abuse. Is he cheating on you? Is he doing this? Then you have to stay in it. And then you continue to stay in it. You think it's you,
Mm-hmm.
and you realize it's not you. And then now, as I got older and I read through the scriptures, he's supposed to, it says husbands, are supposed to protect their wives. I believe it's in Galatians chapter 3. And it tells us that they're not to put any harm to their wives. And so the harm means abuse. You're not to hurt your wives, right? And it talks about what love is. It is not envious. It doesn't boast. It's not irritable. It's not angry. It's not evil. And so a lot of time we don't understand that, and the leaders will lead people the wrong way. And I stayed in it much longer than I had anticipated, but I was able to leave all of the situations. I was able to leave, and then realized my healing that it stemmed back from when I was a little girl, and growing up into that with a father that is, what would you say, a womanizer. And then another, my stepfather, who had abused my mom. And seeing that and growing up around that, you become a part of your environment. Does that make sense? And so when I was of age, 18, 19, and being dark skinned and everybody else is light skinned. So I heard about what you said as well, because I went through that. At 12 years old, I was given makeup first. Nobody else, none of the girls in the home was given makeup. I was given makeup. And so there was this color thing. You're darker and all of that. And so I wanted to run away from all of this. You understand? And so when one of the first guys ever, was attracted to me, you run into it, and because you want to get away from something. Does that make sense? And you don't go through the whole process. And so you run into something instead of really analyzing and seeing what's best for you. But I'm grateful. I mean, we are friends. My first husband and I have been able to work it out after many, many years. We have a 32-year-old daughter together, and we have 5 grandchildren together. And so we're able to talk now. He's in Trinidad, and we talk when he's ready. He does scripture. So there was a healing process that happened over the years, and he was able to apologize for this stuff when he looked back. But it's a healing process. And so, it doesn't happen overnight. I think you guys can all say that. It doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah.
And if the person that is, as I said, he's able to see his faults and came back and said, sorry, sometimes they're not able to see their faults because they're not at that level yet, right? But we who have been the survivors of it, we learn to grace of God that's given to us. We give so much grace as well. And we learn to heal and to become the best that we can. One thing I wanted to add, and I want to thank you guys so very much, as we only have 4 minutes left. I wanted to add, we got perspectives, different angles. I wrote that down, different angles of what domestic violence is, because Renee was able to come and talk to us at a child's perspective, growing up into it. So she brought that perspective as well. And Angel brought that perspective as well as, being in there, being from alcoholic. On that angle, and Pastor Kerr was able to bring it in as that angle as well. So I want to thank you guys so very much. I'm going to give everybody 30 seconds for last thoughts on what's your last thing that you like to say if somebody is going through it right now. 30 seconds each person. Your final words that you want to say to that young lady, that man that's going through it right now. I'm going to go through. Renee, you're going to go first.
So if you're going through this, first acknowledge that you're going through it and it's not your fault. Please don't think it's your fault. Know your worth. Find someone you can trust. And first of all, you take it to God, because you have to speak to God. He's going to be the only one spiritually now who can guide you. It worked for me.
Thank you so much, Renee. I appreciate you. I'm going to go to Angel. Angel, 30 seconds.
Okay, well, find the warning signs, have a safety plan, and also understand that there's help out there. There's a whole community that can support you. So there's the law enforcement, there's friends, there's family. but just make sure you talk about it. Don't just stay in and believe that it's just your own little curse. Talk about it.
Thank you so much, Angel. Appreciate you. And Pastor Judith, final words.
I say if you're dating or courting, do not ignore your red flags. If he tries to isolate you, if he tries to intimidate you, if he uses
Something
fear,
happened to her phone.
if he uses fear, are you hearing me?
Mhm. Yes.
Am you still hearing me?
Yes, we're hearing you.
Okay, if he's using
Yes,
fear
yes.
on you, those are all red flags. Be careful. If he's always gaslighting you, for example, walk away. Choose carefully because you cannot change someone. You cannot change them, and you
Not
don't
up
want
to
to
you.
be in that situation. So I would encourage young women, young men to take care and watch out for the red flags.
Thank you so much, Pastor Kerr. I want to thank you, Angel, and thank you, Renee, for joining me on this time of conversations. We had some technical difficulties, but we pushed through. We did it. Thank you so much. Don't know if we had any callers call in, but that's okay. It was a great opportunity, and in the next 2 weeks, we're going to have some ladies and men, gentlemen, come on and discuss this even more detail. We know what's happening in Nova Scotia. We've had some domestic violence on the rise in Nova Scotia. Here in the church, we've had a pastor and his family. His wife was able to come out and videotape it to save herself. And those are other forms that you can do. And then she sent it out as happening into the church. If it's happening into the church, we have to speak, and we cannot condone these things. If it's a pastor doing it, wives, please find someone you can speak to. If it's the wife doing it to the husband, or a deacon, deaconess, doesn't matter who it is. We're human beings. It's not about titles. The spirit's not well, nothing is well. And so I'm Pastor T. I am your host of Conversations. Have yourself a wonderful evening, and remember, your life matters. We'll talk soon. Take care, everybody.